So we'll jump straight in. We've got an interesting topic this month because, Ed, you sent out one of your Friday tips a couple of weeks ago, and the topic was bottom-up versus top-down management. And it got quite a bit of response and quite a bit of intrigue from people who had read through it. And it makes sense because it's a very interesting topic, and it's one that we all struggle with in our firms in some way, shape, or form. So I thought, if you don't mind, Ed, we might start with yourself. And just to give everyone a little bit of context as to the background of where this management strategies come from, what it is, because some of the people watching may have not have read that email. So can you tell us a little bit about this whole topic of bottom-up versus top-down management?
Sure, Brenton. As you probably know by now, I grew the practice from home, and I never had any leadership training or management training, and I just, sort of bumbled along. And if you don't manage your business properly, that's where it's going to hold you back. It's not how well you prepare a tax return, it's just how well you manage the people, the systems, the leadership you put into your organization. That's going to be the difference between success and failure. And failure I define also as, working very, very long hours with not the return on the time that you've put in. And I discovered that, and at about 600,000, I really hemorrhaged. And the next point is about $1 million. And when I look at the 2 points, it all comes down to top-down management or bottom-up management. What I mean by that is that if you don't have processes and systems and training and have a mindset of training your staff, then you can only control it by a top-down management. You're watching over everything, and you're making sure there's no mistakes, and you're covering everything off and all that. And the problem with it is that you run out of bandwidth. There's just not enough hours in a day to keep an eye on everything. So, I tried that, and you get away with it up to about 600 grand. And that's in Australian dollars for those who are overseas. You can, ensure nothing falls through the cracks by brute force. And that only lasts to about 600 grand. And then you'd be working very, very long hours. And that's not sensible to do that. And it's much more effective to do it from bottom-up management. And what I mean by that is that typically what happens with a practitioner is they hit about $1.2 million in fees and they hemorrhage. And if it's a $5 million firm, there's 5 partners. If it's $2 million firms, there's 2 partners. And part of the reason why they hemorrhage is because they're doing it by top-down management. And typically what happens is they see all the clients and all the traffic, we talked about traffic flow, comes to them, and then they delegate it down to the staff. And we all know that 80% of the traffic that comes into your organization can be handled by the team. But we want to handle all that first, and then we pass it, and we delegate and pass it down to the staff. Now, bottom-up management is flipping that on its head. It's going, well, if 80% of the traffic is going to end up with the staff anyway, just let the client managers direct all the traffic to the client managers, and then you get called in for the last 20%. So that if you do it that way, you can go beyond your $1 million per partner. You can go to about $5 million per partner and not get hemorrhaged at $1 million. But in order to do that, the people that are working with you, they've got to know systems and processes, and they've got to have an organization chart. They've got to know policies. They've got to know, boundaries upon which that they've got to work with. And typically when I see top-down management is where the partners spend 80% of their time with the clients and only 20% of the time with the staff. Okay, so bottom-up management means that you spend 80% of your time with your staff, making sure that they know, how to talk to the clients, how to do the work. And then the staff, the client managers, go and see the clients. And if each client manager runs a narrow and deep team, like we've talked about in the programs to date, then each team should be able to run about $1 million in fees. And if you had a $3 million firm, that's 3 client managers, and each client manager should have around 5 grinders. So then you've got 3 teams. So the ratio between minders and grinders are 1 to 5 approximately. It's not an exact science, but right. Approximately. So if you had 3 teams, you've got 3 minders to 15 grinders. So 15 grinders are, with all due respect, are much easier to find. Okay, so you can outsource it. Most accountants that come out of uni, more than 80% of them are grinders. But the minders, the managers, are the ones that are really hard to find. But if you have a practice that's got 3 managers to 15 grinders, then all of a sudden that problem that you have of recruiting staff, I always get firms say to me, "Oh, it's really hard to find staff." It's because they've got their team structure very shallow and wide, meaning that they're looking for this person who is really quick doing the work, makes no mistakes, got great interpersonal skills, can talk, and you can't find a superstar. And if you do, they're very expensive. And then if you've got a team full of those people, and if one leaves, then you've got lots of trouble. But if you've got a team that's made out of 5 who are grinders, 1 who are minders, then that ratio allows you to not only makes it easier to find staff, but you keep them in their flow and they're happier and they stay a lot longer. So it removes the churn in the staff because they're doing what they enjoy doing. Because not all of us are minders or client managers. Not all of us have these great interpersonal skills and communication skills. Right. And then not all of us, like me, can do the work really quickly. I'm too slow when I try to do the work. So I shouldn't be doing the work. I should let somebody else do the work. But I've got really good interpersonal skills and I should stay in my flow. So if you set the whole thing up, then you can manage from bottom up. It manages it itself. Okay. So, my practice here in Pimble does close to 3 million. There's 3 client managers who run about $1 million each, and they run the practice. We pay them well, we treat them well, and we just spend time with those 3 client managers. And then we make sure that they're really, really good in what they do. And then they go and deal with the clients, and they bring the senior partner in for 20% of the time. And it works really well. And the traffic flow moves through the organisation really, really smoothly. So much so that, all work's done on time. Everyone's, at 5 o'clock, they've all gone home. Nobody works overtime and that kind of thing. It's only like you really work when you're not getting the work done that you should between 9 and 5. So you have to hang back and, put in the overtime. But if you organise your business with bottom-up management, then it should work by itself without you having to do it by brute force.
That makes a whole lot of sense, Ed. Jamie, you've been living and breathing this with Ed for the last couple of years. So if you don't mind, I want you to take us back to before you started working more hands-on with Ed and kind of just sum up your experience as to how you were managing your team. Was it more so a top-down rather than bottom-up strategy, and where were you finding yourself as a result?
Yeah, definitely top-down. It's as Ed said, I was looking after all the clients. So all the traffic in the firm would come to me. And once you get to 600,000 in fees, then you move towards $1 million. Unless you put, senior client managers in place and all the things that we talked about that achieve bottom-up management, then we'll start to hemorrhage. Hemorrhage can be in you can't service the clients or you work 100 hours a week. So Something's got to give. And the game changer for me was getting the senior client managers in, and then also the assistant client managers where you give them a portfolio of your C and D class clients. But even more so nowadays, as we keep growing, is to really clone the senior client managers around the concept of leadership, but leadership in terms of the systems, procedures, and you get to the point where you have to educate the senior client managers that they have to spend 80% of their time with their team and 20%, with their clients. And so the challenge is with your senior client managers, everyone will have different personalities, but your role as the leader is to manage those personalities and remind them that, they're leaders in their own right. So, I was only talking about it with our guys at work and Ed, I think literally this week. And we said, have a look at what Jamie's developed. Jamie's taken himself and developed, 3 leaders, if you like. But then each one of those leaders in their own right need to develop that team, and that team needs to be close knit. So it's almost like a tree and a branch. And, if you want to grow, as Ed says, you keep adding on the team. So, your role once you sort of probably get to the CEO point, is to really, really get in the trenches 20% of the time and remind the senior client managers that there's systems, there's procedures, there's policies that need to be followed, even in the 7 steps of moving clients to the cloud where you can, scheduling the work, collecting the information up front, just the basic things. Because what can happen is, and I think Ed's explained this before, an aeroplane will fly along and it'll be on autopilot, but every now and then the autopilot sort of drifts off. And, if you've got 5 client managers or 3, there's that 10 or 20% that you'll still need to step in, and you'll just oversee it with your dashboard. You'll see things going on where you'll need to step in and just get that autopilot and bring it back online so that everyone's focused on, so that this business does run with bottom-up management, and that, the senior client manager has a growing fee base, and it's not done by brute force, because brute force will only last so long. So my emphasis probably on the discussion is around the leadership and then cloning the leader. So, it's almost a religion. We were talking about this week. It's almost like a religion of how the firm works, and then how the firm works, the smoothness, that develops the culture then, Brenton. Right. And, it becomes just, we sort of call it, within our practice, Skyify it, Skyify it. So you can have a name, whatever it is, but it's important that the leader steps back in and keeps that plane on target with the senior leaders in the business, like the senior management group. Yeah.
Okay. So it sounds like there's quite a few moving parts in all of this. I mean, it's not something that can be implemented overnight. So Ed, could you step us through, when you're working hands-on with a particular firm in your mentoring capacity, where do you start in terms of addressing this topic? And what are the simple little things that you get firms to implement from the very beginning to start moving towards a sort of well-oiled, top, bottom-up managed team?
It really depends on the size of the firm. If it's quite small and the partners are still a client manager, so they're still quite hands-on with the clients, the first thing that I get them to do is to do no grinding work. Some of them still want to jump in there and do the grinding work.
Okay.
And if you do that, you're taking time away from your clients, and you should be spending time with your clients. The problem with delegation is that if you don't hire the right person and give them the right training, then they'll make a mistake, you'll get discouraged by it, and you'll feel like, if you want to do it right, you just got to do it yourself. And you have this tendency to just jump in and do it. And that's the worst thing you can do, because you're not investing into your balance sheet if you just do it yourself. I call it a P&L play. Right. So yes, it's quick if you did it, but when you're 65 years old, you're still doing it if you don't invest into training somebody else to do that work. If the practice is small, then it'll take a little bit longer because they're still pretty much hands-on with the clients. But I emphasize the fact that when you're managing traffic, there's 2 types of traffic. The first type of traffic is communication, meetings, advisory, phone calls, that kind of traffic. And then the second type of traffic is your productivity traffic, getting the work done. You need to hire somebody to start taking that off you and spending the time, with the clients. Then you get to bigger firms where, they're doing $1 million, and that's where they hemorrhage the second point. The second point of hemorrhage is about $1 million per partner. And at that point, they need to start really offloading the C and D class clients to somebody else and nurturing a client manager to come through to handle the A and B class clients. So it is a long-term investment. It is a long-term strategy, moving people across, educating them. But if you spend a lot of your time educating your staff, then you're spending time in your balance sheet, not just your P&L. And then eventually you'll come around. The more time you spend training them, the quicker it will happen. The less time you spend time with them, and the more you get dragged in front of the client, then you're taking time away from training them. And then the slower it's going to take you to step away from, hands-on. But the first thing is to get rid of the C and D class clients on the communication side. So someone in the team's got to have the potential to be a client manager with good interpersonal skills, and you've got to start training that person, start going into meetings with that person, with the C and D class clients, and
Exactly.
start offloading the C and D class clients to this person, and then you could hang on to the A and Bs. And then as this person moves up, then you introduce them to the A and B class clients, and then you keep stepping back slowly. It could take months or it could take years. Just depends on how determined you are. Today, we've got around 9,000 paying clients and 17,000 all up on our database, and the other half of it are prospects. And I don't see any clients at all. But initially, when the practice was really small and they all saw me, yes, it was hard to extract myself out because they got so used to dealing with me. What I found was 80% of the clients just wanted you to show some leadership, and they just basically wanted you to say, well, tell me who to deal with, and they deal with that person. So when I brought the client manager in with me, or the trainee client manager with me into the meetings, 80% of them would just gravitate to the client manager. 20% of them wouldn't. They just kept coming back to me. And we talk about early adopters, middle adopters, and late adopters. Mm-hmm. So the ones that kept coming back to me, they were middle adopters, and I had to introduce them to the client manager 4 or 5 or 6 times. And then eventually around 16% of them eventually went across, and then the last less than 4% just insisted on seeing me.
Right.
And then I then had to make a decision, and it's really just a handful. And then I had to make a decision whether I just saw them or I persisted. Generally, those clients are really, high maintenance clients, and they're really D-class clients. They don't pay you, they whinge, they complain. They're just high maintenance clients, and they consume 80% of your time. And they represent less than 4%, but they'll consume 80% of your time. So I got to a point where, I delegated them to a client manager, and whenever they called and left a message, I got the client manager to ring them back, and they sent me an email, got the client manager to respond with an answer. And eventually they either did one or two things. They either left, which was great because, they were really high maintenance clients. And the other things was that they then started dealing with the staff. And then you'll get one or two who are really, really bad, all right? And you then got to make an effort to move them on. Like, you've got to make the effort to move them on. And the best thing you do is go down and get the business card of your worst competitor, the one that you hate the most, and give them that business card, because they'll screw up your business. It's better that they screw up your competitor's business than to screw up your business. So you then got to get up and actually do something about those ones. And they're generally just a handful. They're really, really recalcitrant.
It's an interesting point, actually, because, Jamie, we've been talking about this a little bit in the last week, and seeing accountants in particular forums talking about how to manage difficult clients. I mean, we've all got one or more, but I found it interesting that a lot of the responses were immediate, just sack them, get rid of them, sack them. And I mean, a particular scenario yesterday was, I'm a small business, we're growing, but I've got a $30,000 a year fee paying client who I'm having trouble with. And 80% of the responses was, just get rid of them straight away. How do you approach that? Because, I mean, yes, it's the right answer in some cases where you've said where you've got the really bad ones, but how would you normally approach when you get asked that question? Should I just sack the client, or how do you manage the situation?
In my case, it sort of depends on the size of the client, what value that they're worth to the firm. If there's a long-standing history and what's changed, you want to speak to the client face-to-face. Emails, we have an internal policy and procedure that any sensitive matters are not to be communicated, with the clients via email. That's the first thing. So once you sort of do all the fact find out exactly what the issue is, whether it's, within your business or fact find from the client, meet with the client and, see if you can address the problem, solve the problem. If it's scope, seep or creep, which some of the forums were talking about, you just go to the client and try and solve it, whether that's increase the fee or not delivering service, whatever it is. But the worst thing, you can do is shoot off an email. That's the worst thing you can do. So, you want to build that emotional bank account to see if you can resolve it. If it can't be resolved and you try a few times, then as Ed said, that if it can't be resolved, sometimes it's worth, perhaps that client doesn't have the same values as you, and they're probably not a good fit for the firm. But the other thing I wanted to say, Brent, just coming back to this bottom-up management, was when I started working with Ed, one of the best things that I used to do was that I'd printed off some words, what am I working on? And I'd stick that on the wall. And so every day I'd have a self-awareness around a task I was doing from a practical sense. And, the listeners will hopefully get something out of this, is that I'd say, this task that I'm doing right now, should I be doing it? So every day, I think for 2 years, I still do it now. I would say, should I be doing this I return? Should I be doing these financial statements? Should I be doing my own bookkeeping? And so with that pasted in front of me on the wall, a lot of the times I say, you know what? I've done this 1,000 times. It's time that I stayed back tonight and built a system so that, Joe over there knows how to do this and I don't have to do it. And so as soon as I thought that, I'd stop working in quad 1 and I'd go and start working in quad 2, and I'd type up a procedure, a policy, or do a video. And then, I'd go home really happy because I knew, tomorrow I'm going to show Joe how to do that. And next time I don't have to do that the 1,000 times that I've done that in the last 5 years. So that bottom-up management, to get the bottom-up management working, and I think Ed will agree, you've got to take the time out, as busy as you are, work in the quad 2, get the system going, get the video working, the SOP or whatever it is, develop it, train the person how to do it, and next time when you come to the next month or the next week, or that same person, that I return that you've been doing for the last 10 years, or you've done the introduction, whatever it is, the quad 2 effort that you go to, sure enough, you've just moved yourself out of quad 1 and into quad 2. And essentially that is designing bottom-up management. And that's at a real everyday practical sense. One of the things, Ed, that we cover in the Wize, the Vault, for example, and a lot of the subscribers may have seen it, but is the list that you did for us, Ed, where we all listed what we did in a month, and some of us had, Ed, 50 things that we did. There's a spreadsheet in there, guys, that you can do. Then we classified it, Ed, remember, between quad 1 and quad 2. And, every board meeting we'll bring this quad 1 and quad 2 list out, Brenton. And, okay, Jamie, what have you moved out of your quad 1 area? Might be Craig or Darren. I'm looking at the names there. Next month, Kenneth, what have you moved out of your quad 1 area? Tell me what you've moved. And you might share that with a colleague, or, share it with yourself, for example. Oh, you know what? This month I've moved these 5 quad 1 items. They've gone and they're over here because Joe's doing them and I'm working more in quad 2. So in a practical sense, when you move out of quad 1 and move into quad 2, you are designing the bottom-up management. And Ed, you would agree with that comment? Yeah.
Yeah, 100%, Jamie.
Yeah.
Like, you remember when the boys, well, your client managers kept saying to me that they couldn't do any more than they were doing, and they were handling around 300 grand in fees. Well, my team here handles 950,000. So they were saying to me they couldn't do any more when they were doing 300, when I knew that they could do 900. But they were just drowning in quad A activities. And give you some examples. They were doing the tax returns themselves, right?
Yeah, even face-to-face tax returns. Yeah.
Yeah. They were doing face-to-face tax returns. They were doing the grinding. They were doing the bank recs. That one of them was even doing lodgement of tax returns. So you may recall, Jamie, I got them to write everything that they were doing on a piece of paper. And
including me.
Yeah, including you.
Yeah.
And then we put all those activities into either quad A, B, C, or D. We got rid of D and C, got rid of them all, just don't do them. And then we looked at A and B. And with A is to try and get out of doing A. So A are things like, putting out fires. If someone drops their tax returns in, like a BAS return the night before it's due, all right, so the quad A activities put the fire out. In other words, bust your backside to get it done, to lodge it on time so it doesn't get a penalty. The quad B activity is to educate the client not to do that again, because you've got other clients that you need 2 months to 2 weeks time to do it, and put in a process so that, when it comes leading up to it, you're calling them and reminding them they've got to get their work in. So that kind of activity is preventative activity. So training someone to do it, managing the client's expectations, they're all quad B activities. They're important, but they're not urgent. But the more you do of the important but not urgent activities, like a month before it's due, ring them and say, you're ready to bring your work in now. Have you got it all ready? No, it's due on this day, right? All those kind of activities will reduce having to work in quad A, which is putting fires out. Training someone to do that I return. Training the clients not to come in to get the work done face to face, but to drop the work off, right? That's all educational stuff. They're all quad B activities. And the more you do in quad B activities, the less you do in quad A. They were struggling to do 300. Now they're doing a lot more. And same as our team. Our teams do $950, $1 million, and they do it hands down because they've also educated their team to do the grinding work. So it goes down. That's called bottom-up management because you're working on quad B and not quad A. Just wanted to touch on the bad clients that we talked about. It's really hard to differentiate between a client that's simply recalcitrant and a client that just needs more education and more training and changing their habits. So if they're used to coming to see you and you say to them, look, I'd like you to see this client manager, if they say no to you, then they could just be a middle adopter, or a late adopter. Like I'm a middle adopter, don't change very quickly. It takes me a while to change. But those people are worth investing in. They're worth persisting with, and they're worth putting up and continually to train them and encourage that they should use the client manager. And some of them will take you 5 or 6 or 7 times. Others will take you 8 or 10 or 15 or 20 times. And the really, really late adopters might take you 30 times. But when they do change, right, then they're really, really good clients because they're very, very loyal, right? And then the ones that just won't change after 30 times of doing it, then they fall into the, more the recalcitrant, the ones that you need to get rid of. I just delegate them down to somebody else, all right? And unless they're really, really bad, a handful that are really, really bad, they're just really bad. And you really need to move those on. But in the main, there's not that many that were that bad, but most of them have eventually, dealt with somebody else or they've moved on. Just don't pay them attention, because the more attention you pay them, the more oxygen you give them, the more they play up. So what you do is, it's just like children. If your children are playing up the particular area, just ignore that, and eventually they stop doing it. But if you give them more attention, more oxygen, they just continue to be bad. But then if you delegate it to somebody else, if you delegate it to an assistant client manager, what a great training ground that is. If they can get through dealing with a recalcitrant D-class client,
It's a good point to raise there, because I think this whole strategy is a journey rather than a task that you just implement. Because I look at your journey, Jamie, and, it would be nice to think that we could all say, okay, we're going to remove ourselves from the grinding work and pull back from the client interaction overnight. That would be great if we could do it, but it just doesn't happen that way.
It takes a couple of years, it really does take a couple of years, but you have to be persistent and you have to be consistent and follow, the methodology that we're talking about within the Wize network. But it will take the guys and the subscribers a couple of years, depending on the size of your practice, to achieve the outcomes and go on that Wize journey. Like one of our largest clients that I had since day one, he took 2 years. So every month I would bring up Ed called it quad A, or just say, quad A, quad B, or quad 1, quad 2. So I would bring up my quad list, and this particular client would always be in my quad A.
Right.
And he sat there for 2 years, their largest client. So finally I got him across to a client manager that he was happy with and comfortable with. And then I finally I withdrew from that client then, because literally visited that client twice a month for over 10 years. Finance meeting, board meeting. And so that just gives an idea of the 1%ers. I'd have to say to everyone, it's probably 1% of the more difficult transition, but be very tactful with your client, use your interpersonal skills, be genuine. This is what I said. I said, I'm growing the business. I'm stepping back. I've now got managers because, Joe, I've known you for 5, 10 years, whatever it is. I'm sick of working 100 hours a week. So just find the right approach with each client, because every client, every person is a little bit different. Find the right approach. Always try and do it face to face.
I changed it a little bit. You got to sell it with what's in it for them.
I had that question.
Not what's in it for you. You know, like you got to say what's in it for them. And what's in it for them is that they can get access to this client manager much quicker. They know 80% of the work anyway. They can always call me back in for the last 20%. So you've got to position it from a point of view of what's in it for them, not what's in it for me.
Ed, I used to often say, oh, such and such is smarter than me, and this is why.
Exactly.
You know, I'd always use that line. Oh, you know, Joe is smarter than me because of this. You know, and they're probably true.
But I think it's important to remember, if from the context of what you're talking about, Ed, is there is going to be this lagged process. I mean, we're not all the same. So some clients are going to take those extra touch points, and could take 1 year, could take 2 years, as Jamie's outlined. But I think it's having the knowledge that that's the case, and that they don't need to be switched off as a client. They just need to be educated a little bit more and persisted with a little bit more.
Yeah.
Correct. And also sometimes, you know, the client manager you chose may not be appropriate for that particular client. And you might have made a mistake there. So you should try somebody else. I mean, we've got the luxury, because of our size, to have a choice of different client managers to offer the clients. But, you know, if you're very small, then you're not going to have that choice. But it is about leadership. So you need to lead, because if you let them lead you, you're not going to change, right? So if a client says to you, oh, no, I only want you to deal with me, Jamie, and then you go, oh, okay, well, you're letting them lead you and you're not showing the leadership. I used to always say to the clients, look, you and I, we do the architecture. We design where you're going to go. That's the builder. They'll come in and build the thing that we've designed. But most of the time you'll be dealing with the builder, and you only need to call the architect in every now and then. And the builder will call me in. So the client manager will call me in for the last 20%. And, you know, we'll do the architectural kind of work, and then you're back to the client manager who will then implement it and build it, right? But most of the time you'll be dealing with the builder. Now, most of the businesses run teams as well. They've got their own staff. They understand that. And they understand that, you know, they've got teams. When we come to the implementation, our team will work with their team to implement it. But that leaves, you know, him and me to just do the architectural work. And then after a while, the client manager does all the architectural work anyway, but you just got to do it slowly. So, you know, when you step back slowly from it, you're not saying to the client, I'm disappearing completely. And no, I'm not. I'm just making sure that, you know, that you're getting really good service, because the team that I've set up, they can do that better than I can do it, right? So then it leaves me to just do the really high-end strategy work with you. And as I said, you know, most of the C&D class clients end up doing the strategy work, client manager anyway. But in the early days, I'd still do the strategy work with the clients. I'd still go in there and do the PR work. So you've got to move yourself back to just strategy work and the PR work.
Yeah.
I've had a comment from Craig, and I wouldn't mind getting your feedback on it, because you both are natural finders and relationship, you know, great interpersonal skills, good with clients. And I'd say over your journey, just like most of the people on the line here, have built quite close relationships with clients, to the extent that some of them, you know, are probably friends. A good few of them are probably friends. So in terms of removing yourself from that work relationship, how have you found that to be with clients who you have a friendship with?
It's really easy. I mean, my biggest client still pays us around 70 or 80,000 a year. And I still go walking with him every Sunday. And, you know, I say to him, mate, you can ask me anything you want. But the team is so good that he doesn't need to ask me anything. You know, like sometimes he asks me things more about the business, like strategy and that kind of, not tax, because the team's really good on the tax side. They're better than I am. And he knows that. He knows that they're better than me. So when he asks me tax questions, I don't know the answer. He goes, it's all right, I'll go ask the client manager. But it's a slow process. You know, they've got to get confidence in the client manager that they're dealing with. And don't forget, when you're very small, the only person that client's ever seen is you, right? And often they think that, you know, they're your only client, right? Because you've actually never introduced them to anybody else in your practice. So if you see it from their point of view, they've only ever dealt with you, and in their mind's eye, that you've only got one client, that's them, all right? So all of a sudden, if you introduce them to somebody else, then those things that I talked about, like 80% of them will just go to the person you introduced. like 16% of them will take longer to introduce. You might have to introduce them 4 or 5 or 6 times, and then a handful you'll take 20 times before you go right across. Now, this largest client he was my very first client, and I used to go out there every month, a couple of times a month, and whenever he rang me up, I dropped everything and I drove out there. So I went from doing that, right, to just don't deal with him at all from a tax technical point of view. So it can be done, but you need to build a team around you, get confidence, be patient, be persistent, and lead. You cannot do this unless you lead. You've got to be patient and understand that when someone says, no, I only want to deal with you, they're just saying, give me a bit more time. Yeah. All right. Give me a bit more time to get used to the client manager that you've introduced to me to, and give me a little bit more time to change my habits. That's all they're saying.
Okay. Perfect sense. Jamie, anything to add to that?
Just a couple of practical things. When I was in the transition of handing over the clients to the senior client managers, a couple of things that I would do was, often we've all got mobile phones, and many, many times the client would ring me, and Ed mightn't have done this, I don't know, but I did this for the technology. I'd just say, hang on a minute, I'll merge the call, with Paul. He'll actually know this answer better than me. So we'd often have a 3-way conversation, and Paul would answer it for me with a client. We'd have a discussion. So ripping on the client. So a lot of the time, once they met the senior client manager, I'd often merge the calls. And the same with emails. You get emails from the client, and I would reply to the client and CC, one of the guys, because they'd met them, and say, look, I think this is what you do. What do you think, Paul? And then all of a sudden, you've got 3 or 4 or 5 emails. The senior client managers looked better than you. So it's just dripping. Yeah. It's just educating. It's just educating. And just from a practical sense, it just happens. And because people are people, and you build rapport, people just want answers. They want service. And if they're responsive, and we sort of spoke about responsiveness in the last couple of weeks, they just get to know the senior client manager. And doesn't mean you don't have to be friends with them. I've still got the first clients I ever have, and I don't even look after them. But I call them up and say, how's life? Where'd you go for holidays? And it's just not an issue. It just happens. It's a little bit of leap of faith in there too.
Brilliant.
Yeah, and the really big clients, like if you're still working in your practice, you should do the PR work with them. I go to lunch with them, do all the
That's
PR.
what I often do.
That's really important. That's what I call balance sheet stuff. Do the balance sheet stuff, and get the P&L stuff done by the team, but you do the balance sheet stuff. And then that will refer more clients to you, because people are people, and they like relationships, and they'll
That's
like
right.
you. They won't refer work to you unless they like you. And so do the PR work with them. Don't get stuck in the quad A activities, or what I call the P&L activities. Get stuck in the balance sheet activities, which are all the quad 2 activities.
Yeah.
Okay. We covered this topic actually, Ed, because the response from it was so engaging. I mean, there's quite a few people responding back to that email saying that they really connected with it. And I think at the end of the day, it comes back to this people issue and this topic of leadership. We've been speaking about it between the 3 of us the last week. I mean, we are all quite interested in the topic of leadership, but I've got a question, which I'll kick it off for you, is how do you get your people interested in becoming better leaders? We've all actively engaged in it on a personal level because we're interested in it, and we know we need to become better leaders to be better business owners. But how do we get our teams to recognize that they need to be better leaders?
Knowing your people, right? And sometimes the opposite happens. They want to be a leader, but they're not. You've got to be a leader of leaders and help them. And I use this example when I was straight out of uni, in my apprenticeship, if you like, with a firm, and I won't mention the name, but I'm not a grinder. I'm a minder. I'm more of a manager and a finder. And I was really unhappy because, like all graduates, you've got to do the grinding, right? You've got to, learn this stuff. There's no shortcuts. But I was really unhappy because, not that I struggled with the work, but I just did not enjoy the work. So I ended up leaving after a year, and then I'd go to another firm, and then a year later I'd leave, and then I did that 3 or 4 times, and I thought something's wrong with me, because everybody stays there well, at my age, they stay there for a long, long time. I'm talking about 10, 15, 20 years. That's just standard. But what was happening was that if the partner of the first firm understood or was a better leader, he would have sat me down and said, Ed, you're a manager, you're not a grinder, but you've got to do 4 or 5 years of this to get the knowledge, then to be able to manage somebody, because you've got to know what you're talking about if you're managing somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
So you really need to be patient here and mapped it out for me, help me understand where I am in this thing. And he would have got the management, the leadership out of me. He should have recognized that I was a leader, and he would have kept me. Instead, he didn't help. He didn't understand it himself, let alone his own practice was out of control. Like, he was just working stupid hours, enormous hours, trying to do it by brute force. And he didn't understand this either. So he couldn't help me. So I left. So he lost me, who, if I'd stayed there and he nurtured me to be a leader, I could have done so much for that practice, but he lost me. And unfortunately, leaders have to be leaders and help other leaders. And unfortunately, we don't have that in a lot of firms. And that's my answer to you. Like I'm constantly, helping Cindy here to lead, because she's a practice manager here, for her to understand her team. And as I said, work 80% of the time with her team and 20% of the time with the clients. And most practices work, well, my boss did as well. He worked 80% of his time with the clients, and I hardly ever saw him. How is he going to help me? He wasn't showing any leadership to me. So that's my answer, Brenton.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. We're looking at the Wize model for the Philippines team, with most bookkeepers eventually wanting to be accountants. Or do most bookkeepers want to be accountants in your experience, or are they just happy staying as bookkeepers and being promoted to bookkeeping manager?
So with that one, we've had exactly that experience, Ken. And there's a couple of answers to that, and it sort of partly falls on what Ed said. First of all, you should really do your performance reviews. So if you build the Philippines team, it's like absolutely critical that one-on-one, you treat them just like any other team or individual, and have performance appraisal, and obviously ask them what their aspirations are. So if you're a bookkeeper now, do you see yourself being an accountant? Like, what are your aspirations? So obviously, ask them. And you will find, Ken, in the Wize Vault, there's a journey that we've designed for people in the Philippines. So there's a journey that we built that goes from a junior bookkeeper, if you like, right through team leader. Now, we have a team leader in the Philippines, and she's been with us close to 5 years now. And she made the team leader, but purely because she is a leader as well. So she wanted to be a leader, but her KPIs, her interpersonal skills, the way that she manages the other staff, came across to us that she is a team leader. So sort of two things, a bit like Ed said, some people might want to be a finder or a minder, but, perhaps they're just a grinder. You almost have to, if I say it, understand them more than they understand themselves. A bit like a good sports coach will know who to play at full forward and who to play at full back. But the second point is they want to be able to do it, because if they don't have the passion to do it, there's no point in them putting in a seat that, you're promoting them to something that obviously they don't want to do. But we actually have had that case where we've had a couple of bookkeepers who started out as bookkeepers, and then after we got to know them and talking to him and having the performance appraisal, to my surprise, they said, you know what, Jamie, I've seen what the other accountants do, doing all the GST and the tax. I'd love to be a tax accountant with the accountants and not bookkeeping. So, but that's come later on. But that's only become because we did the performance appraisal and we actually asked them. But then, obviously they've got to tick all the boxes to get to that point. So you certainly will. Hopefully that answers the question anyway. Ed might have something to add.
Leadership is a bit like parenting. Okay, so you've got to know your children pretty well. And sometimes, they say, I don't want to go to sleep, and you know that they need to go to sleep. You got to just, lead, because if you let them lead, they'll stay up all night, and then the next day they're a rotten little thing. They haven't had any sleep. So it's a bit like that, So often someone will say to you, I'm a bookkeeper, but I want to be an accountant. You got to drill into why they say that. And sometimes they might say it because they want to earn more money. Sometimes,
that's right.
They may say it because they want to. It's prestigious, or sometimes they say it because they think that that's what you want to hear. You want to hear that. You got to drill right into why they say what they say, because if you put somebody into a position that they're not naturally good at, you're setting them up for a fall. I mean, there's not that much difference between a bookkeeper and an accountant, but there's a huge difference between a grinder and a minder, all right? And often, grinders tell me they want to be a minder, a manager. And a manager has to have really good interpersonal skills, very good communication skills. And the managers earn more money. So if a grinder says they want to be a manager, you've got to find out why they do that. And we've had a case here where that's what happened, and we had to sit the person down and say to them in very nice terms and lead them that they're not a manager, and that, if we did put them into that role of a manager, that, they will fail and then they'll leave. Because once you promote someone to a level, you can't come back, because it's all, losing face and all the rest of it. And it's pretty horrendous. Mm-hmm. So you set them up for a fall. And then they'll leave, they'll work for somebody else and apply for a client manager role, and they'll fail there. And then they'll leave a wake of failure behind them, and you haven't helped that person. And the thing that you should do is which is what we did, was to explain to this person that they're really, 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 really good in their job. They're not a good client manager. We identified it because they wanted to earn more money. So we put a bonus scheme in place. So the more productivity they produce, the more money they can earn. So if you identify what the real thing is, right, then you can address it. But if you don't, and you just do what they tell you that they want, and you put them there, generally, like often someone will say, I want more money, and you give them more money, but that doesn't address the problem. And then that might mask it for a few months, and then they're back to the problem that they're feeling. If you don't address that problem, you just pay them more money. You put a Band-Aid on it. Eventually, if you don't fix the problem, that comes out again. And then they'll end up leaving anyway, and you pay them more money and they've left because you haven't addressed the problem. Mm-hmm. And so you've got to get down to the problem. And then that takes leadership, all right? So you can't just ask them what they want. Obviously, you have to ask them what they want, but you have to drill into what really is the problem. Right? And that's not easy. That's very difficult. Mm.
Great advice. And Ed, you've been talking in your language in this session around P&L activities versus balance sheet activities, and also working in quad 1 and quad 2. Would you be able to just reiterate what you mean by working in P&L versus working in balance sheet activities? Sure.
So someone who works in P&L says this to me: it's quicker if I just did it myself. It's more efficient if I just jump in there and do it myself. Someone who works in a balance sheet activity, he says, if I spend the time to train this person, then eventually they're going to be able to do it for me. All right. So working in a balance sheet is in an investment in your balance sheet. If you're prepared to invest in your balance sheet, and in your balance sheet, assets are your staff. So the person who works in a balance sheet is prepared to spend the time to train their staff. The person who works in the P&L just does the work themselves. So when a client comes through the door, like doing an I-return, they say to me, it's quicker if I just did it. If I just do it, it's quicker. By the time I train somebody else to do the I-return, I could have just done it. And, this person, I'll use this example. He said to me, see, Ed, I've earned $1,000 in 1 hour. And I said, how did you? And he was really, really happy about that. And I said, how did you do that? And he says, well, I did 5 I-returns at $200 each, and it took me an hour. Isn't that great? And I said, no, that's terrible. Because this guy is 63 years old, and he's still working his P&L. And because he's never invested into his balance sheet, so he's never trained somebody else to do it. So now he's 63 and he's still working in a P&L. All right. Now, also quad 1 activities, which are important and urgent. Right? Important and urgent is like if your car breaks down in the middle of the highway, it's important and urgent to get rid of, to move it on. But if you work in quad B, which is important but not urgent, important and not urgent is if you service your car, it's important but it's not urgent. Mm-hmm. So if you service a car, it wouldn't break down, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So quad B, which is important and not urgent, is your balance sheet activity. So often it's important but it's not urgent to invest. So whether you invest in the super fund or invest into shares or property or invest into your business, which is technology systems and training people, right? That's investing into your balance sheet. And often people don't do that. And that's quad B, which is important but not urgent. So we don't do that. Same as exercising is important, but it's not urgent. That's a quad B activity. And if we don't exercise, we get bad health, which is a quad A activity, which is important and urgent. So if you get a sickness, it's important and urgent to deal with it. But if you work in quad B, which is do some exercise, which is not urgent, so nobody does it, but you'd avoid getting sick or staying healthy, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, it does. Jamie, you mentioned before videos and standard operating procedures. Could you provide an example of a SOP that you would do a video on? So is it more in relation to technical, so how to do a BAS, or is it more so on the business operational side of things, example, process on how a job will flow through the business from start to finish?
Pretty much everything. So to give you a good answer, if you look at Ed's 7 divisions of the org chart, the 7th division is the first division that you remove yourself from. You can start with the standard operating procedures, which are just videos in a nutshell around, Division 7. So Division 7 might be the administration, for an example. And a classic example on our intranet is a series of videos for the practice manager or the receptionist on how to do the Net Promoter Score with a system called Client Heartbeat. That's an entire system that we have. As soon as the jobs or the tax returns are finished, the senior client managers, they complete their bit, the team completes their bit. It flows through to our jobs list and simply comes off the computer to all the jobs that are completed. And then there's a series of steps, a series of videos that I videoed, and they just get followed. So that's just an absolute classic example. To more technical things in the production division, how to do a payroll. The list, Craig, is literally endless. It's endless. And the beauty of the SOPs is if you're talking to your clients, we've got our own clients doing SOPs and it helps them. So it's pretty much endless, isn't it, Ed?
You've got to say to yourself, if I wasn't here, how will this run?
Absolutely. Yeah. And if I do this task more than once, it should be recorded. Absolutely.
A couple of tips there to do that, because you mightn't have got the videos yet, is use a little system called Snagit. That's a fairly basic recording system, and a higher end one is Camtasia. You can use that as well. There's different ones out there that you can use, and as soon as you do the videos, you put them on your intranet, because if you hire a new receptionist, new practice manager, or a new accountant, got a particular procedure, just, the first day, the induction day, say, look, there's a series of videos here I'd like you to watch. If you watch the whole lot, they probably go for 3 hours, but today watch that section. As soon as, sure enough, they'll pick up a job or that job they've got to do, and they'll ask the question, and you can say, well, look, just watch that video, and if you still don't know how to do it, come back and see me. And it's the 80-20 rule. 80% of the time they won't ask a question, they'll get the answer from the video. The other 20% is where you'll have to step in. So this 80-20 rule that Ed first introduced to me a long time ago now, it literally sort of changed your life, yeah.
If you systematize 80% of it, then it's a lot easier to manage the last 20%. So systematize 80% and manage the last 20%. Now, just give you an example, like when we set up trust deeds, and we were selling like 160 a month, it was just madness. Wow. And people buy a trust deed, and there's like 1,000 questions they'd ask. So you spend 2 hours on the phone explaining, how to set it up, how to set up the bank account, where to put the rent, and where does the money come from out to pay the loan, and like there's 1,000 questions. Whose name should I put on the contract sale? Anyway, you could do it by brute force and answer all those questions, or quad A activities, all right? Or you spend some time in quad B in your balance sheet, which activities are important but not urgent, and put an instruction manual down. So that's what we did. So whenever someone bought a trust deed, we'd send out this instruction manual, systematize 80% of it, and then you then manage the last 20%, which are a lot easier to manage. So everything that you do and everything about Wize is around this 80-20. So every time we talk about what we're doing, it's systematize 80%, so you can humanize the last 20%. In fact, you can't even be human on the 20% if you're trying to do it by brute force with 100%, because you're just burnt out, and you can't even be human to someone if you're burnt out. So you've got to systematize 80% of it to allow you to be human. Because often people say to me, oh, we're just like robots if we systematize everything. But no, it's actually to allow you to be human. Because if you try to do it by brute force, you won't be available to the clients.
Yeah.
So it's very important.
And just to add a couple of little practical things to that as well, I think this really comes down to success, not perfection. I think we get a little bit afraid when we start talking about having to record ourselves on video and use technology to capture this stuff. Now, you know, as Jamie mentioned, there's a number of different tools that you can use to do this, but keep it really simple to start with and create yourself a little system for creating the systems and the SOPs. So, you know, in its simplest form, an easy to use screen capture with your video and your microphone and your computer is as simple as you need. And then if you don't have an intranet yet, just start a little file management system in your document management with, you know, certain steps or certain processes that you can just plonk the video in there for now. And you'll find as you start doing them more regularly and you ingrain this into your culture, so really getting your team on board with them identifying as well tasks that they're doing over and over again. And if they can start to do their own videos, which is where you really want to be, because then your entire business starts to get captured and recorded. So don't try to have something really polished from the start, because it won't happen. You're better to just start doing it in some way, shape or form, and then you can build on it and improve it from there.
I ask our staff to do videos all the time. So get that leverage, because you shouldn't be just the only one doing the video. You know, our practice manager, Jess, will come to me and say, oh, we're doing this. And I'll say, look, can you do a video of that and then show me? And so you just build so much leverage when you get everyone doing videos, and all of a sudden everyone's removed more from quad one again.
Absolutely. We absolutely love running these sessions. Wize guys, thank you so much for your time as always.